Welcome back to another episode of Foolproof Theology. My name is Chase Davis, and I am your host. We're going to have a great conversation today with David Harris on public schools and sanctuary schools and what's going on with the immigration conversation within public schools. He's a public school teacher, and so he has a lot of experience. He's written an article over at The American Mind that we wanted to promote, talk about, and I ask him a lot of interesting questions. At least I think they're interesting. I think you will too. Before we get into that, I want to remind you about Burn the Ships, a conference coming up we're hosting at the Well Church in Boulder, Colorado. That's August 1st and 2nd. We're going to have great speakers, Doug Ponder, Michael Clary, Michael Foster, myself, and Matt Patrick. We also just booked a special guest. He's a kind of country music artist that also does hymns, Jordan Robert Kirk, down from Lubbock, Texas, I believe, and he'll be coming up doing a concert that's included in the ticket price on that Friday night, August 1st. We'd love to see you there. I'll put a link in the show notes. You can sign up now. Early bird pricing in soon, so you want to take advantage of that, but you can also do group rates, all that kind of good stuff, and so make sure you head over to Burn the Ships at our website, boulderwell.org/burntheships. Sign up, join us out in Boulder for a great time. We're going to have some great talks for some great men, so I hope you'll join us for that. All right, let's get into today's episode with David Harris. Welcome back to another episode of Foolproof Theology. My name is Chase Davis, and I'm your host. It's good to be with you here today. We're going to talk about a really fascinating kind of, it's not niche, but it's a really important topic that goes overlooked, and it's about sanctuary schools. A lot of people have heard about sanctuary cities all over the United States, some major cities, some smaller metropolitan areas. Where I am, Denver, has kind of gone back and forth saying they're a sanctuary city, but they're not. And their mayor was called, I think, to Congress recently to talk about that issue with the gangs here. Well, anyways, we have sanctuary schools now, and this is very popular. And David Harris, the author of an article titled Sanctuary Schools Must End, I have him on the show. And so, David, welcome to the show.
Howdy. Thanks for having me.
David, why don't you kind of introduce yourself to people so that people get a better idea of who they're listening to?
Sure. So I'm David Harris. I am a ESL teacher. So I teach English as a second language in Tennessee. I've previously taught in New York. I'm from originally upstate New York. I'm the son of a pastor. I never went to public school. I was homeschooled my entire K through 12. Then I went to community college and local community college in New York, and then a state school where I got a bachelor's in English and a master's in education. And I started teaching ESL about 8 years ago, and it was to put my wife through nursing school. My wife was in a nursing program, and I had previously taught social studies in a Christian school, and I liked that a lot. So I wanted to get back to either a Christian or classical school in teaching, but they don't pay very much, and I was trying to get my wife through nursing school without debt. So we kind of switched places. She worked, I finished my master's, then I worked full-time as a public school teacher. And when she was in her last semester, that was the COVID year. And she did not, she was 20 weeks pregnant. We decided she was not going to get the mandated COVID magic shot. And so she was fired. She was barred from nursing school. Our entire life was upended and changed at that point. And we eventually, about a year later, we moved to Tennessee, kind of running from kind of escaping in a way from just all these policies that had made our lives very difficult in New York. Which was hard because we love New York. We love where we're from. We love upstate New York. Many of your listeners probably know my brother, John Harris. He lives in upstate New York now, and he loves talking about it. We both do. We love talking about it. But we're in Tennessee now. We moved to the Knoxville area where I continue to teach ESL. And then about 2 months ago, we moved to Crossville, which is fairly close to Cookeville, Tennessee. And that's sort of my background as is pertinent to this issue. I'm also the director of Truth Script, which is a online publication. We do articles, conferences. You have been published with us before, and I'm hoping at some point that I can put all my attention there.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to have John on the podcast. I think he wrote a book called Against the Waves recently. That's, I believe it's out, but I'm going to have him on in the next episode. So listener, you can hear a couple brothers back to back, which will be kind of a unique experience. So I love that. You're an ESL teacher. You're currently an ESL teacher in the public schools. Is that right?
That's right. Yep, that's correct.
Yeah, I was an ESL teacher when I was a missionary. I am curious with that kind of, it's not a ministry per se, but as a Christian, we view everything we do before the face of God, trying to love God and love others. does it provide you with unique opportunities to maybe talk about your faith? I mean, that's what when I was an ESL teacher, I was a missionary. And so anytime we would talk about kind of Western civilization or the English language, Christmas and Easter would come up in the curriculum with the ESL. Are you strictly teaching like English as a second language, or do you have a broader kind of approach within the public school on what you're teaching?
Well, frankly, I got into ESL for two reasons. I'm a history guy. So is my brother. That's kind of our shtick, I guess, in a way. We love history. I love particularly like British colonial history and like Civil War history. So I lived in South Africa for a little while. I did missions stuff over the course of about 3 years when I was like 17 to 20. And this is in like 2009 to 2012. And it was there that in Southern Africa, I learned to really love language and culture. And I still do. Like I like interacting with people from different places. I've always loved that. And so when I was trying to consider what do I get a master's in and what could I teach in the public schools, I realized that ESL was the thing that would give me the most flexibility in teaching. Most of the time, you're not given curriculum. Being a mainstream classroom teacher, if you have a passion about a particular area, is hard because you are restricted to a very particular curriculum and everything is about test scores. That is all that matters is test scores. How are the kids doing on the test, their data? There's this next test is coming up. That one passes. Okay, there's another one. And that's all you kind of do. Whereas ESL, you generally don't have to do grades. You don't have to have a strict curriculum. So you have the freedom to talk about, I can do a lesson. Who is Jesus? I can do
Right.
that. And in New York, that probably would have been, I was able to do that stuff in New York. In Tennessee, most of the state policies are generally, they'll like in a school system will say, you are barred from teaching religion. And then it'll have an asterisk and it'll say, unless it is, pertinent to the particular curriculum.
Right,
So
yeah.
you can absolutely talk about, you can talk about Christianity. You can talk about Jesus, what it means. I can give you the whole gospel in an academic sense. And then obviously like outside of, because you have to connect a lot with families and stuff, you're getting a lot of connections outside of school. And I've had, very like particular opportunities to share Christ with people because of that, that sort of connection within the school district. So I would say for a lot of people, like you're saying, you think of ESL abroad, it's like the way to get to China. That's how most people would think about it. Oh yeah, sure. You're an ESL teacher, you're a missionary, but
Sure.
you can do that. Like if you're really passionate about that, you could do that in the United States, anywhere as an ESL teacher.
That's amazing.
Because every single pretty much school district in the entire country is filled now with people from other places that don't speak English, and you could teach them about America and Christianity as a being part of that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I saw one of your posts about being in South Africa. I found it really interesting. The South African situation is really complicated. I keep wanting to get a guest from South Africa. Maybe we can talk off air about who I could get, but I've had Will Tanner on the show to talk about Rhodesia and that kind of stuff. It's a very complicated situation there, but with the public schools, it's a fascinating thing. I've seen, I'm not on TikTok, but I've seen some videos going around of public school teachers kind of bowing up. They typically have colored hair. And like, if ICE comes to my public school, I'm going to bar the door, or even like they become more dramatic talking about how they're going to defend themselves. They don't look like they could defend themselves, but they're going to fight ICE or something. I just find it highly ironic that these are the same teachers that were like very pro, get the shot in order to come to school. So you have to have an ID to enter the school that says you got a shot, but now you don't have to have an ID to enter the school to get an education. So how maybe set the stage a little bit before we get into kind of some of the critiques. At this point in the public school system in America is basically if you're an illegal immigrant or the child of an illegal immigrant, do you get free public education in America?
Yes. Yeah, you do. So basically, and this is why the term sanctuary schools is the right term. And I'm still working out, Lord, why did you place me in this particular role? And maybe it is to bring attention to this issue because now it's at the forefront of public discourse, thanks to Trump being back in, has a lot to do with it. But basically to break it all down for, if you don't know anything about this topic, if you are a child who is a school-age child, from anywhere on the planet. So you could be in the Maldives yesterday, And if you fly here tomorrow to Orlando, Florida, which is where I am now, and you have proof of guardianship, so it could be a birth certificate, which is very easily forged, actually, and you have proof of occupancy, like local occupancy. So that could be a electric bill, it could be a rental agreement, it can be just. I mean, I've seen a lot of these documents. It could just be a sheet of paper that says I am renting this to da 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 da. It doesn't matter what language it's in either. You just translate it. As long as you have those two things, you can be from anywhere on the planet, and you can start school, tomorrow basically, or within a few days at any public school in any corner of the United States, from Key West to Barrow, Alaska. You can do that. You may have particular difficulties in like really specific places, I suppose, but officially, thanks to a Supreme Court case from 1982 called Plyler versus Doe, pretty much anybody from anywhere in the world has the right to an education in the United States, regardless of citizenship status.
Okay, and so you were an ESL teacher in New York, now in Tennessee. What's been some of your experience in the classroom with working with some of these students who come in? Obviously, it's not necessarily their choice that they're there. Their parents, we could get into the issue of illegal versus legal immigration. Regardless, they're not speaking English. What's been, maybe highlight a few examples you've seen of kind of like, are they eager to learn English? Are they happy to be here? What's that been like?
Yeah. So first, I would address a few misconceptions. I think especially on the right, there are, and also you'll see this a lot online. You'll see it in media discourse amongst especially the right wing. So one misconception is actually about teachers themselves. So I think you mentioned it. When somebody on the right thinks of a public school teacher, they think of a blue-haired, gender fluid 20-something in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah, sure.
Right? That tends to be what people think. That is a pretty small minority, and in some more progressive areas, it probably is, more or less like 25 to 50%. But generally speaking, that is a very small minority of teachers. The overwhelming majority of public school teachers are pretty regular people who are extremely stressed out and do not have the time or energy really to devote to progressive causes. They're just trying to survive, and they are quitting. Public school teachers in the United States are leaving the profession at an incredible rate. I mean, there are teacher shortages everywhere. It's very difficult to fill teaching positions because the education system has just gotten extremely chaotic and stressful. So that's one thing about it. I don't have any statistics on this, but from what I have seen and heard firsthand, I believe antidepressant usage is very high among teachers. I think there's actually quite a bit of self-medicating that probably goes on because they're dealing with a lot of stress in their teaching environment. So that's about teachers particularly. So about ESL students, a common, I think, misconception is that they are chomping at the bit to learn English. That you get, and that's another sort of that's something that you get as a sort of as an archetype of your average ESL student. They can't wait to learn. They're probably better than the regular students. I mean, in some ways, they're more American than the regular students because they chose to come here. It's not true generally. There are a few exceptions. But it's really all about scale, and this is pretty easy to visualize. So if you have a school that is, say it's 80% or 90% of a local population. So if you're in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, it might be mostly black, right? If you're in middle of nowhere, Texas, it's probably all white. If you have all those local people, and then you insert 5 kids from Guatemala or Honduras who don't speak any English, they will sit there in silence for maybe a year or two, but they will be integrated into that system. They will become a part of that town. They will become a part of that. That is assimilation that you can handle. So traditionally in the United States, in most, with the exception of some major cities, most moderately sized school districts, that's what they're dealing with. They're dealing with a few students here and there. Here's one from Thailand, here's one from Japan, and it's very easy to assimilate them because they don't have anybody to talk to. They just have to learn and sink or swim, and they just kind of get with the program. Now, if all of a sudden overnight you have 30 to 40% of your student population being, kids from Honduras or Guatemala or Mexico or Venezuela or wherever, now the assimilate you have to ask the question, what does assimilation look like? Because if you're approaching a 50% majority, that you can't assimilate them, because at some point, as that number grows, there's a question of which way the assimilation even goes. So what's happened over the last 4 years, and this has really been since January 2021, when the gate was flung open and millions of people were imported into the country and invited into the country, is school districts, even smaller school districts all across the United States, I'm talking small towns in the middle of nowhere, everywhere, have had all of a sudden, sometimes 30, 40% of their student body all of a sudden speaking a different language, being from somewhere else. And now there is no assimilation. And those students generally are not really that interested in assimilation, because why would they be? They can get by with their language. They're in the school because, well, it's free, right? It's somewhere to go while their parents are working. And it also anchors them to that particular place. It's much harder to deport somebody and get somebody out of an area if they have kids in a school. So that's another misconception, I would say. We can get into the particulars of the cultural aspects of it, but
yeah, that's a good topic, because in Boulder Valley School District, for example, which is a major public school district in Colorado, and it's where a lot of the ideas for other school districts come from. They're actually shutting down school this Thursday because so many teachers are out protesting. I'm not sure what they're protesting, if it's DOGE or Department of Education or just in general, but so many of them have taken a vacation day on Thursday that they can't even hold school on Thursday. And we've seen this even locally with a lot of parents fleeing the public schools, either to homeschool or to go to a classical school or a Christian school, a charter school, because they just saw what happened in 2020 and on, where in Colorado, actually, 2021 was harder because 2020 people were willing to give kind of the benefit of the doubt. Then 2021, they came out with more severe restrictions in 21 than in 20. It was wild. And so it really touched home. Even in, where we minister, we used to meet in a middle school, and it was kind of I don't know if you would call it an ESL school or what, but it was where somehow most of the immigrant families ended up there, and most of them were of Hispanic origin, and they would have a program. I don't know if it was federally funded or not. It was called Dreamers, and they would have kind of after school mentoring and that kind of thing. I did that for about a year, just because I thought it was a weird meeting. Our church was renting that public school, and I thought it was a great way to, love people and reach a community that typically is not reached in a place like Boulder. But I ended up leaving that as soon as we had our first kid. I was like, I can't be mentoring this other kid and not spending time with my own kid. So I had to bail from that program. But there's a lot of federal dollars that also get tied up into this. And so what happens is these school districts get this influx, like you mentioned. Now they have to provide services to these children, and that's tied in with federal funding. They typically have to hire middle managers, administrators, that kind of thing. And so then the idea of that population being removed for whatever reason has monetary incentives tied to it, right? So now the school is dependent on those federal dollars or state dollars to operate at a certain level with certain teachers and certain services. And so now it becomes a very kind of contentious thing to try to remove them. One more question on this kind of thing. My wife and I were talking about this the other day. For these students, if they are illegal immigrants that are coming across illegally and being kind of imported, like you've seen in many places in the country, whether intentionally through NGOs or whatever it may be, are these students technically illegal immigrants, illegal aliens, whatever we want to call them? Do they qualify as, like, I've heard the phrase anchor baby or whatever we want to call, do they count as citizens, or are they considered illegal immigrants if their parents are illegal immigrants?
So yeah, if they are, if they entered the country illegally, then they would be considered illegal immigrants. The confusion over the last 4 years, and again, this entire field, everything has changed since 2021. I mean, just to sort of put it in perspective, when I moved to Knoxville, or Maryville, near Knoxville, the only counties that were hiring for my position, because my position is would be indicative of where these people are going, right? When they come into the United States, where are they going? It generally would be urban areas, but the only counties that were hiring in that area were Knox County, which is where Knoxville is, which would make sense, and Sevier County. And Sevier County is where Dollywood is. So there's a large kind of service industry there. So those are the only two places, and that would make sense. That would track with the typical trends. By the end of 2023, or probably about halfway into 2023, every single county touching Knox County was hiring for my position.
Wow.
So and these are very rural. This is rural Tennessee. These are small towns. And my experience has been that a lot of these school districts, they don't really know what to do. They're not used to this issue. But as you mentioned, you have to, if you have a child that doesn't speak English, generally you are required to hire a teacher to teach them. There's a county near the county I live now where I believe there was like the number of kids in the county that were learning English was in the single digits. And they still had to have a full-time person for those handful of kids to travel to all the schools to provide English language training for them. So the situation has changed so much since 2021 because we don't even know how many people are here, and it's very gray on legally what they're considered. Because if, according to the Trump administration, if you entered illegally at all, whether you use the CB1 app or whether you were, asylum seekers, that's the word that's been used because that's what the Biden administration used. Then, according to the Biden administration and all of its infrastructure, you are not illegal because you are an asylum seeker. You're just waiting on basically you're waiting on a hearing in court, which, could be in 2028, could be in 2029 at this point.
Yeah.
But according to the Trump administration and what the policies that at least they say that they're going to push, even if you were born here, the child of an illegal immigrant, you're not technically a citizen because there's a desire to change birthright citizenship. So I would say technically, if with where things stand legally now, if you're born in the United States, you're technically a citizen. That's the way that our entire infrastructure works. If you just go over to the El Paso hospital and have a child, now that child apparently is an American. Now, I think that's ridiculous. You probably think that's ridiculous. Most Americans, I think, do, but that's basically official policy. But it goes much, much deeper than that because there's policy, right? And then there's the sticky policy realities like these court cases that make it very, very difficult to refuse education to people who just walk over the border. So it's a very sticky situation, and that's why I'm kind of entering the fray on it, because I have a particular experience and perspective on it, I guess.
Yeah, I appreciate that. In your article, you highlight this decision, this 1982 Supreme Court case, Plyler versus Doe, and it mandated that public schools can't deny education based on immigration status. So what do you see as the kind of the primary flaws in the ruling? I think it was a case in Texas that came up, I think. Yeah. Are there any flaws in that ruling? I mean, that you would say it was ruled wrongly, that they came down on the wrong side? Like, how would you have navigated that situation differently, maybe?
Yeah, I think Plyler versus Doe, and my desire, and I've said this the other day on another podcast, I think. My desire would be to make Plyler versus Doe as well known as Roe v. Wade, because the ruling is insane. It flips the idea of just having a nation on its head. So according to Plyler versus Doe, and there are many Supreme Court decisions like this, and we're in a bit of a constitutional crisis right now, just because we have all these judges making, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. Yesterday with like deportation flights, they fly a bunch of Tren de Aragua, illegal criminals actually out to El Salvador, and the judge says, no, you have to turn the plane around. Like, what? So we're in this constitutional crisis right now where there's a big question about who really has the authority. Can the president actually he's the executive? Can he do executive things, or do these courts, are they really the rulers? Like, do they make the decisions? So the same thing goes with Supreme Court law. And we've had a lot of decisions. Supreme Court law is not absolute. It can be overturned, as we know with the overturning of Roe v. Wade a couple years ago. So, and Roe v. Wade obviously was a horrible decision. There were judges, I believe, that ruled on it. I don't remember if it was Roe or Wade, regretted being involved in that decision. So it's
Right.
the Supreme Court can make absolutely horrible decisions. So Plyler versus Doe is a horrible decision. It makes no sense. And the basic clause is that the 14th Amendment applies to people who are here non-illegally or who are not legal residents of the country. So if that's true, right, and the background of the case is basically there was a class action suit in Texas because Texas was charging families $1,000 a year, which in the late 70s was a lot of money, because Texas state law said we are not responsible for educating non-citizens.
Right.
We're only which makes sense, right? That's just pretty sensible thing. If you go to Switzerland, well, I don't know about Switzerland, but if you go to, I don't know, Zambia, they probably would say the same thing. You go pretty much anywhere in the world. That's like just being a country. But the ruling there's a class action lawsuit from a bunch of families that were not here illegally, and their kids were being charged $1,000. And so the ruling was actually that Texas was violating, and the school district in particular, because Texas was a defendant in the case, the state of Texas, that the school district and Texas were violating these students' 14th Amendment rights. Now, if that's true, you think of what that means. That means that the 14th Amendment applies to the entire world. Everyone in the entire world is an American as long as they step on this magic soil, right? You step on the soil, you are magically an American. That is insane. That's country ending.
I didn't realize, when I read your article, I didn't think about that until you just mentioned it, because basically, play that out. If somebody could prove they purchased something in the United States, or they had someone write on a piece of paper, they have visited, or they reside here, or have any kind of bill they've paid, and they can prove it. They could take an online class in China and be admitted to public school. Oh, you're an American. That's insanity. I don't know how that works.
But actually, so we have a pretty significant, and people are moving towards online public school. It's a big industry now. I've looked into it before because it's it's flexibility. You can do this job, but you can do it from your home. That sounds pretty good. And it doesn't pay as much generally, but theoretically, you could be in another country, and as long as you could prove that you're a resident of this state, then you could get free public education online. So I say you overuse the word insane because everything around us is insane, but
sure.
It's antithetical to just being a country. You're either a country or you're not, you know, which I'm sure we'll get into the sort of evangelical industrial complex and how this issue in particular is used as a bludgeon to shame people who are more conservative. But it's just the most basic thing ever. The people in your town, they're the ones who should have the right to education. And we can have a conversation about whether you even have a right to an education. I would argue, no, you don't have a right to an education. That's something that you should earn, not something that you just get given.
Sure.
But the whole world having a right to your education, that's a whole nother hill of beans.
That's insane. It's crazy. Well, okay, so we have a large population in many areas of the country which are not from here, don't speak English. They were brought here maybe against their will. That's the parents' right to take them where they want, even if it's a crime that they commit, doing so illegally. But are there any ways to unless Plyler versus Doe is challenged and overturned, given conditions on the ground, what are strategies that could improve assimilation? Because I think there's a big, like you mentioned earlier with the caveats about public school teachers and the students, I think the misconception is that when we talk about these things, these are just heartless right-wing people talking about these things. It's really not true at all. We want the best for these families, for these students, and for a neighbor who has lived here, already and needs services too. So are there any ways that you've seen that we could effectively assimilate them? Or is just the most effective strategy to, Tom Homan is in charge of the Department of Education and he's going to find them all and send them all back? What's a good strategy to deal with this kind of thing?
Yeah. So let me make the compassionate case for deportation. I've been blessed with an ability to habla a bit. So I talk to my wife my wife is Latina. Her mother is an immigrant from the Dominican Republic. So I'm very comfortable in sort of the Spanish world, especially the island Spanish world. But I am able to generally, especially in rural Tennessee, there's not a lot of people who speak Spanish in school districts. In fact, usually there are none, except for the students. So I'm often asked to translate. I'm often asked to sort of be a go-between between families and students, or the school and the families of the students. One of the first questions I always like to ask them, and I like to have this conversation as early as possible, is, do you want to be here? Would you rather be here? Would you rather be here, or would you rather be in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, or Huehuetenango, Guatemala, or Caracas, Venezuela? Where would you prefer to be right now? Are you happy to be here? Now, I just moved almost 2.5 years ago to Tennessee. I love Tennessee, but it was a hard move because I loved where I was from so much. So it was very emotional. It was hard to get used to. You just deal with a lot in going from somewhere you live for me, it was 30 years in New York, and then going to a whole new place. But everybody speaks the same language. People are more aligned with my values in Tennessee. There's a lot of things that make it pretty easy. I can't imagine how much harder it would be to be somewhere where nobody speaks my language.
Right.
I don't even really know what people think about me. I see myself referenced in the news a lot, basically, especially now that Trump is back in. But I don't really know what that means in particular. My family brought me here because they said that it was going to be a better life and all that. But I would say 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, I very rarely encounter a student that wants to be here. They generally do not want to be here. They would rather be back in their country. They're here for a variety of reasons. A lot of it has to do with medical care. There's some sick family member, and so the family comes over because they more or less can get free medical here. A lot of it has to do with the parents are pushing the kids to, you need to learn English. You need to go to college so that you can do better than we did. That is a lot of kids, and it is a tremendous amount of pressure. I mean, some of these kids I had a student a couple of years ago that was actually suicidal. We had to have some interventions because they were dealing with so much pressure concerning basically it's your responsibility at whatever it was, like 13 years old, to carry the family into the 21st century. And it is a lot of pressure. They have a very hard time dealing with it.
Yeah.
And that especially falls on the girls. A lot of the time the girls end up being the liaisons because they learn English and then they're supposed to be the liaison for the family. A lot of the boys, they're kind of there to goof off. And that has a lot to do with the public school system as it's set up anyways. It's kind of orientated towards a female sensibility. It's very hard for boys to succeed in public school because it's very hard for them to sit for 6 hours. And I couldn't do it. So I feel for them.
Yeah.
But all that to say is that's another misconception, I guess, is that they want to be here. I have not found that to be true at all. I've had many conversations with students in Spanish, and they would rather be back in their home countries where it's comfortable and their family lives. A lot of them have a very idyllic view of their home countries. Oh, my grandpa has a farm and he's got goats and chickens, and I just want to go back. And ironically, even the kids who were born here and their parents were the ones who came here, a lot of them want to go to Mexico. They're like, oh man, I want to go to Mexico. We used to visit all the time and it was so great. And which I get. My grandparents were in California and I was growing up in New York and they had Disneyland there. So I had a pretty idyllic view of LA and wasn't so idyllic. But they generally don't want to be here.
That makes sense. Yeah. And I think most people can sympathize with that. Even like today, as we're recording, it's St. Patrick's Day, or Patrick of Ireland. I'm Protestant, so I feel uncomfortable calling him a saint. But we don't know his last name. So like you'll see a lot of people attach kind of like their Irish heritage. And it's like, I just want to go visit Ireland. It's where my people are from. And they're probably not even from there. They just have this kind of like fantasy land. And Ireland at this point is like crazy. I have friends over there. But this is natural. This is normal human behavior. And so I think what you're setting up the case is like the most compassionate thing is like, hey, like they don't even want to be here. Why is it unloving to then like, okay, fine. You don't have to put the ASMR prison chain video on Twitter like Trump does when you send them back. But like the most compassionate thing would be to be like, hey, you want to go? That's great. Go. Like, we'll help you to go. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I add something to that really quick?
If you're a listener to the program, I wanted to make sure you knew about a great opportunity with the Ancient Language Institute. The Ancient Language Institute teaches Hebrew, Greek, Old English, and you can level up your intellectual engagement with good books, ancient books, the books that shaped our civilization by learning these language and reading these books and these manuscripts, everything involved in the original languages. So I wanted to encourage you to go over to ancientlanguage.com, sign up today for their classes. They are classes that, like I said, cover Latin, Greek, Biblical Hebrew, Old English. It's for kids or adults. They have terms all throughout the year, and they have one coming up that you need to sign up to be part of. They have live class meetings online. It's all done remote. It's a living language approach, which is much more engaging than your typical high school foreign language class. And so you're going to be reading books in the original language like Virgil's Aeneid and other books like that day one. And so you can sign up today. Their summer registration term closes April 19th. Sign up today. It's 100% money back guarantee. If you're unhappy with the experience at the Ancient Language Institute, then they will give you your money back. So it's really a no-brainer. If you're looking to really grow in your intellect and engage in good books, I would head over to the Ancient Language Institute at ancientlanguage.com.
Yeah. Just because, and I got a little lost, I think, when I was making that case. But if you just zoom out a little bit and think about the situation, so we're told basically constantly that these people are our future. These are our future. We need to bring them in because why? Well, because they're going to make America a great place. Like, they're going to improve America. Now, you may believe that. I mean, even on the right, there's a pretty strong, like, I'm not I'm an anti-illegal immigration, but I'm pro-legal immigration. They'll say the same thing. We need to bring people in, but we need to do it legally. Okay. But if that's true, either way, then you are. So my question would be, why do you hate Honduras so much? Sure. You want to take these people out of Honduras that are all going to benefit Honduras so much. And I'm not saying that I'm not saying that cynically. I believe that. I think a lot of these people are probably the best case and the best hope for Honduras. And it's true. If you have a family member who is getting into trouble, right? The focus usually in your family interventions is, we can't enable them. We can't enable them, right? So you have to put them in a situation where they kind of have to take responsibility for themselves. If you just are constantly offering outs, then they're never going to change. And that's, I think that's probably true on a country level too. So Honduras is a great example because Honduras is a mess. Honduras is basically a failed state in many ways. There's parts of the country that are doing okay, but Honduras is run by cartels. A lot of half the capital is basically run by cartels. It's a fairly miserable place because there isn't law and order. Now, we have a giant military base. It's the largest one, I believe, in Central America, in the middle of the capital. So we're actually there, but we're not running things. They're running things. But if we incentivize all those people who could be working hard to build Honduras and make it a decent place to live, because we're not taking the infirmed and the sick. They can't make a 6,000-mile trip to come here. We're taking the people that can actually do stuff. They're the ones who are taken out of Honduras. So my question would be, are you just so patriotic? You love America so much. You want to take the best of everybody. Why do you hate those countries so much? What's wrong with being Honduran? What's wrong with Honduras?
Right.
That's how I would flip that.
That makes sense. Yeah. Honduras is fast. I was there on a mission trip in college, and we were there to, see the local culture, and we were working at an orphanage. And so we were doing it's basically like a vacation Bible study for the orphan. It was a Christian orphanage. And the week after we left, there was a shooting right on the same street by gang members. And I was just like, dude, this is a wild place. Like, Mexico's one level. I've been down on mission trips to Mexico, but Honduras is insane. So kind of with this said, what policies are now kind of being suggested? I know you mentioned in the article bills in Oklahoma and Tennessee. What are these bills intended to do?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a particular bill in Oklahoma yet. I know Brian Walters, the superintendent of education in Oklahoma, was kind of the first public voice to come out and say, we need to end sanctuary schools. I don't know if they've translated that into legislation. They may be watching Tennessee, because Tennessee has gotten the farthest in challenging Plyler versus Doe. So the only way to stop this, the only way to, legally speaking, is you need a bill that directly challenges the ruling. It needs to be challenged, and it will be. And like all those teachers protesting, that's probably what they're protesting. They're probably protesting ICE in schools, which is not going to happen in Boulder. It's not going to happen. It's just not a thing that's going to happen. ICE is not going to go. The optics are too bad. They're not going to go into schools and pull kids out of classrooms. It's just a boogeyman. It's not going to happen. Now, should it happen? I mean, we could have that discussion.
Sure.
But uh, the there's the teachers will get whipped up into into shape over this. Even ones on the right wing, because they'll just be like, "That's inhumane," and that's why I say it's going to be used as a bludgeon to shame people who are especially on the right, especially Christian conservatives, which is why it's good to be armed with the truth so that you can kind of combat these lies. But specifically about the bill. So right now in Tennessee, there was a bill that was proposed at the end of January, I believe, maybe it was the beginning of February. It has now gone through several committees. It's changed a few times. Now it's called HB 0145. And that bill basically would allow school districts to bar undocumented students from entering their schools. So that's a direct in the face of Plyler versus Doe. It would be immediately challenged. It would go to the Supreme Court. And then I don't know how the Supreme Court would rule on that with Amy Coney Barrett. I really don't know. It may not even work out. If it doesn't work out, then it's back to the drawing board, and it would have to be, to figure out another way of challenging it. My advice at that point would be if your local public school is open to the entire world, you need to think about that as a parent. Maybe you should really pursue other options. But the idea of this particular bill is to directly challenge Plyler versus Doe so it can be overturned. Now, once it does get overturned, now it's up to the districts to actually have the gumption to do something about it. But then once that happens, then the state could actually, from the state could direct, hey, you can't do this. And if the case is overturned, it could even be directed federally. Like, no, you can't allow non-citizens into a school. The schools are for Americans. They're not for the whole world. But yeah, any legislation, and the only place I know of there's specific legislation is Tennessee, would be to challenge that ruling. And I think everybody's watching that right now to see what happens.
Yeah, that makes sense. I go back to, you mentioned kind of like how the common kind of evangelical, and I want to speak to evangelicals particularly because I think Christians have been duped on the topic of immigration for a long time. Now we could get into what I don't believe they're conspiratorial things. I think they're actually documented things. I think Basham talks about this in her book about how Christians, whether it's the evangelical immigration table or others, have kind of adopted this, anyone in the world is an American if they believe it in their heart kind of attitude. And so many Christians have been kind of inundated with this talk about Jesus being a refugee, asylum seekers, they're victims. And I think as a pastor, as a Christian, I'm a father, they are people. Like, I'm not denying that they're people that we should love and that, that we should care for. But how would you maybe debunk some of these? You've already talked about one of them with, kind of like, why do you hate Honduras? But what are some other ways that you think would be helpful for Christians to think about, evangelicals who are seeing this, and they are children, so like we want to care for them. We are, but at the same time, like we want to uphold the law, and we also want to care for the children that are native born to America. So what are some common tactics that you think Big Eva? Because what in Tennessee, one of the things you didn't mention was that kind of the teachers unions with all this power and all this in other states can very easily raise the flag and rally. They can protest schools. Protests and apparently shut down the school district for a day. So there's a lot of power. There's a lot of reaction that will come from this. How would you equip Christians to think more biblically about these matters?
Yeah, unfortunately, this has been, and I think probably this is the new BLM. I get the feeling that this issue has been a favorite of more progressive elements within evangelical institutions for years at this point. It goes back to, the 70s and the sort of social liberalism that kind of infiltrated seminaries and whatnot. Because, all of your major Gospel Coalition, Christianity Today, they have pushed this stuff like crazy, World Vision. So there's a few lines of defense I would put up. So one would be most of these institutions throughout the COVID saga were lockstep in, use masks, get the jab, do all this stuff. And generally they would use Romans 13 as a, well, what about Romans 13? What about Romans 13? You heard this a lot. While all these people were being brought into the country. So One thing would just be to go back to Romans 13. It's, well, you seem to really value this concept of submitting to authorities. Why should not people from other countries, why is it okay for them to violate this scripture? And particularly for Christians, because a lot of the evangelical immigration table, and you're seeing this a lot online right now, is really freaking out over, and they will go immediately to this is going to damage Christians. It'll keep Christians from Syria. It'll keep Christians from, okay, it's usually a very small percentage of, Christians in Syria is a very different issue than, or in Nigeria. Nobody seems to care about Nigeria. Nobody ever talks about it.
It's wild.
Nobody cares about Nigerian Christians for some reason, except Equipping the Persecuted. Look them up. Great organization, great ministry. Judd Saul doing good work in Nigeria. But 20 million people, or however many millions of people from virtually every country on earth coming into the country, if you just go to, well, there's Syrian Christians being persecuted. One thing would be like, you say that missions is really important. Why not go be a missionary there? Like, if you believe so strongly in this, what are you willing to put on the line? You want me to pay for this? Like, your main interest is that, the United States is a rich place, right? And so it's kind of incumbent upon us that we need to pay for the whole world. We need to sort of invite the whole world in. I think that's just another version of kind of wokeness. And when you peel back the layers, you'll find a belief that America's very bad, very evil. Christianity really hasn't done anything. It hasn't really transformed Western society, because we had slavery, and just Christians, and especially white Christianity in general, is just very bad and very nasty and very mean. And it kind of needs to pay for its sins. And this is a way of paying for its sins. So you'll usually find that. But, what are you willing to go? So on one hand, you're saying that missions is so important, we need to go. But then on the other hand, you want to bring everybody here. Which is it? Because we could fund you to go there. So that would be one thing. But a lot of it has to do, Order Amoris is brought up a lot. Order of Loves. The scripture is very clear on, you provide for your family first. You love your family. There is a natural progression, and obviously there's there's a lot of debate about it's some Christian in Africa, are they as close to me as somebody? Well, yeah, sure. Obviously, like you said, if there is a kid from Honduras in front of you and they have no food, then give them food. That's pretty straightforward. But nobody is arguing that. There's nobody on the right saying we should take away food from them. They're saying it's not a question of should we feed, clothe, and support them. It's, should that happen in their country, or should that happen? Because remember, there are large percentages. We're between 1% and 10%. In some countries, I believe Nicaragua, 6% of Nicaragua is here now. Wow. So should all of Nicaragua be brought here? Where does this end? Where's
the line? Yeah.
Where's the line? Like, how are you making this decision for who should be here and who shouldn't be here? Because everything is platitude. Everything is just very vague platitudes that don't actually have particular applications. And I would say this is also true on the right with how they talk about this issue, because how many actually know what Plyler versus Doe is? How many know how many, illegal migrant kids are in their town, or just illegals in general? You don't know. Instead, people are on Twitter arguing about Jews or something. Like, maybe the place to start would be to find out what's actually going on in your town. Actually go out and vote in your local election. Like, there's a lot of very specific ways that you can get involved in where you live, because God has not called you to, deal with, if you live in Texas, he hasn't called you to deal with the situation in Maine. Like, it's the stuff that's in front of you. Yeah. And that's going to be true, like wherever you are. People need to be brought back to that. Don't just live in an online world. Like, live where you are, be where you are, act where you are. Which is, not the case with any of these evangelical institutions that obsess over this issue, because it's just a way to slam people they don't like, I think.
Yeah. And I think it's a way for many of these evangelical institutions, which for many, many years now have been trying to prove their virtue to the leftist and prove that they're good people. And in the face of Marxism or neo-Marxism, whatever you want to call it, they've been trying to show like, oh no, we're legitimate. Please accept us and welcome us to the table. And it's like, you got to stop playing that game. Like, these people who say they care about others and love other people, they're using those words that are our concepts, and we know the truth. They're using them against you to manipulate you. And you have to think prudentially and you have to think biblically about it. And it's really not that complicated. Like you've mentioned, like, of course we care about people. Of course, we're just trying to think of the best way to love the places where we live. And I think you're dead on. Like I remember this feeling in 2020, part of the mass hysteria that we all experienced with BLM and other such things was like, I was so frustrated that, I live in Boulder, Colorado. This is not a pressing matter. But people make it a pressing matter. And I'm like, I would prefer if I didn't care about federal politics as much. Like I would prefer it to be diminished in importance and their authority, but that's not reality right now. It has a lot of authority, but like, I don't want people in my church to be worked up in a frenzy over, who the president is and crying online. Not that people in my church are crying online about the president, but you know what I'm saying? Like there's a lack of connection to the local places. And that's why I've tried to invest more in like getting connected here locally, networking with local pastors, because national stuff is important. I think it's important when you're in a place like Boulder, San Francisco, kind of cultural hubs that influence other places. Anytime I meet a pastor in Denver, they're complaining about what's happening in Denver with the homeless population, restaurants being shut down, out of business because of the minimum wage being raised, violent gangs, whatever it may be. I'm like, yeah, that sucks. And most of the ideas that are playing out policy-wise in your city, in Denver, are started at our university, in the academic institution. And your town is just the social experiment 30 minutes away where all the policies get implemented. And so I do think I would echo your call to be connected locally. Well, David, this was a great article. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to it. Any kind of closing thoughts you would commend to us?
Yeah, I mean, this is an issue that the fate of the country, or whatever, the fate of what we know as America kind of rests in. I don't want to make it all about this particular issue, but this and related issues. And this gets back to like, what is an American? What is a nation? And what is a nation? That's the number one question, biblically speaking. What is a country? Is America a country? Is that how we actually think of it? Is it just some people say, like an economic zone? There's actual people who are from here that, are really, really suffering right now. They're really, there's, I'm in a little town in Tennessee, and I see every day just very obvious, like rampant drug use and just a lot of hopelessness. So before we do anything else, we should probably kind of figure out the situation that we're in, before we just import all these other people into the situation. It's very hard to love people when you're just, it's like having it's like sometimes when you're running a Sunday school class and there, it's like there's so many kids and you have this kid has a bloody nose, and this kid, like you try to love all of them, but you can only do so much. You need their parents to come back eventually and pick them up and take them home and, right, give them actual attention. So we need a scale that we can actually deal with in order to love people, in the way that Christ would have us, love them. And obviously that starts locally, but my main encouragement would be, think about this issue. Think about this is like a practical thing. So you can have you were talking about how in Boulder you were volunteering at the school and everything. So there are things that you can do to involve yourself, and like don't be scared of the people. These people need Christ. That's what they need. They should obey the law, and they can get the gospel on the way.
Right.
I support people who are not from the United States going back to their countries if they're not here legally. But, they shouldn't be dehumanized. They were invited here. And, maybe the Lord would call you to care about this particular group of people. I don't know why I guess I know why. It's because who I'm married to partially, but the Lord has put me in a Spanish rich world, right? Most of my days are in Spanish and stuff. But he, that's what the particular thing he had set aside for me. And I'm going to try to minister to those people and, show Christ's love however I can. Like you can do both. And that would be the thing. Like you do not have to choose between, supporting things that are good, just, and right, and loving people. You don't have to choose. You can do both very easily.
Yeah. Hey, real quick before I let you go, I don't know if you've got a couple more minutes, but I wanted to ask, because back in 2021, 2020, there was this phrase that was like the woke. I think might have been when it like peaked, and I could sense it in the air when they try to get Latin X into the lexicon. Do you remember this? And all the
Latinx.
Latinx, all the rich white people started adopting this lingo. And I would just be like, you guys can't be serious right now. Like, this is a joke. And of course, when you challenge them on it, they say you're being unloving and non-inclusive. What was your experience as an ESL teacher being married to a Dominican woman? Was it viewed as a joke in that community as well?
I think the only time I heard that in New York. Nobody says that in Tennessee, but I did an interview. I considered moving to Tulsa before we moved to Tennessee because we had some friends there and we thought that might be a good option. I did some interviews at some schools there, and there was a principal who used that. He said, we have many Latinx students. I was like, and that was the first time I'd really formally heard that. I was like, it is completely nonsensical to Latino people because their language is gendered. So every single word in Spanish has a gender. Right. So yeah, nobody uses that word. It's not even on their radar. If you said it, they wouldn't know what that means. I mean, there's some progressive, Latinos, usually second generation or third generation, that kind of adopted it, but it's kind of fallen out because it just like you can't press that onto a language that has gender built into it. It makes no sense. So that was a fail, complete fail.
Anyways, all right, David. Well, this was a great conversation. I think you're right. I think more attention needs to be brought to Plyler versus Doe. I really appreciate you spending time and explaining the issues to us in a Christian way. And I hope your article gets widely read. So thanks for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Foolproof Theology. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with David Harris. If you did, share it with a friend. Give it a great rating on iTunes or podcast or Spotify, wherever you listen. Subscribe on YouTube. Share it on there. Smash that subscribe button, I think I'm supposed to say. Also, make sure you go over to the Patreon. We have great things happening over there. I'm releasing a study of the 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith. And so I'm walking through that exclusively for Patreon subscribers. And you can head over to the link in the show notes to sign up today for the Patreon account. So thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time.